Anybody who cares, which is nobody. Aww. So, actually, the funny thing is that I don't think anybody actually uses it.
Does anyone subscribe to your channel?
Oh yeah, we've had subscriptions, but that doesn't mean anything.
What's your day?
It is Wednesday.
It's the 8th because it's St. Cooper's birthday.
All right, so let's talk about standard of living for a second. What does standard of living mean?
Standard.
Like your average lifestyle.
Well, kind of, yeah. I mean, that would be a standard of living would be your lifestyle. So, what would a high standard of living be?
You want the best.
High quality of life. That's good. Yeah. You have the best. I don't know about that. It suppose it depends on how high it is, really. Yeah. The way I think I've always heard it described is you have enough to cover all your basic needs and some extra. Enough to have, like, vacations, for instance. Which is one of the things that kind of separates Northern European lifestyle from, say, the United States. Let's talk vacation. How much vacation time do you usually get in the United States?
Once a year.
A week.
2 weeks. A week.
2 weeks, something like that. But how many days of vacation do people actually take on average?
Like 5 more.
1.
Close, it's around 2. At least it was a couple years ago. On average, they take 2 days of vacation per year. So a lot of it goes to waste. You know what the average is in Germany?
8.
6 weeks.
Oh, lucky.
How?
In France, it's more.
Why?
Why? Because they view time off as time off. If you think about it, in a lot of jobs in the United States, you're on the clock even when you're not.
Yeah.
This thing's called on-call, which sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good times. And that's the reality of quite a few lives, In addition, we are kind of obsessive in the United States when it comes to work. I know it's one of those things that seems like Americans lazy. No, we're really, really not. Compared to most other places, we work more hours. There's only some places we don't, but those places tend to, I don't know, they're cultural traditions, I guess, more so anything else. So that is one thing that is different. In addition, in a lot of companies, I've heard tell that in places like in Germany, they care how much work you get done, not necessarily how you make that work out. What I mean to say is that, in the United States, 9 to 5, right, every single day, Monday through Friday. But what if you want to say, get all your work done in 3 days, right? Bang out 36 hours or so in 3 days. You're not allowed to do that in those companies. But in Germany, they don't care. Hypothetically, if you wanted to work like back-to-back 20-hour days, you could do it. And work 2 days and then be off 5. Of course, those 2 days really, really, really suck. But, you could do that, hypothetically. In addition, they make you take your off days. Like, for instance, let's say you have only taken 1 week of vacation, you got 5 days, or 5 weeks in a row, 5 weeks saved up, and it's getting to be November. If you don't have it used up by the end of November, they won't let you come back to work. You just have to take it. You don't get to save it. You don't get to not use it. You're going to use it. In addition, did we talk about paternity leave? Yeah. How much do they get? About a year is what I understand is what they suggest.
It's like a month in there.
6 weeks is what it is in the United States. Missouri. And the other thing is there is a thing called paternity leave in Washington. We do have it here, though less frequently utilized. That would be your guy being out for a long period of time.
I know people think it's kind of great. It's really not.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that in sociology if you ever take that course. But in any case, those are differences that contribute to kind of how they live their lives. They don't think anything weird about it. There's also a kind of a neat thing, I believe it's in Switzerland, but I could be wrong here. So if anyone knows for sure, feel free to speak up. But there's a thing called the box, right? And you have your choice whenever you have a kid. They will give you $1,000 equivalent cash, or they'll give you the box, whichever you choose. And almost everybody chooses the box. The box is a giant crate, as you can imagine a box, that has a ton of baby stuff in it. Everything you could basically possibly need, from clothes and onesies and coats and all these different types of things for a kiddo up until a certain age. And there's even like a mattress on the inside, so the box becomes a crib. So it's like, they're taking care of newbies. The idea being that you start them off right, they'll succeed. Mannerisms, of course, they vary dramatically depending on where you are. Norse countries are going to be different from British countries, which are going to be different from Germany and France and all these different places. One thing I think is very interesting is sort of the types of activities that are sort of popular sports of that sort of thing. As you can imagine, where there's a lot of snow and hills, we tend to have skiing, things like that. In Germany, for instance, the outdoors is a very popular place to go in sort of more rural areas. There have been like village-wide hikes where everybody goes out hiking together, which you guys know lederhosen?
Yeah.
The stereotypical German thing, leather pants, with like little suspended overalls and big stuffy socks. That's actually, that's called, that's specifically for hiking, which seems weird, but the reason is if you've ever been actually backpacking, one of your biggest problems is, other than carrying everything on your back, is going to be going through really kind of sharp, nasty, spiky grasses, brambles, things like that, and the pants will protect you from that, as well as the big, thick, woolly socks. So they're designed for that purpose in mind. The other thing is that if you look at the sports that have been developed in this area, the UK has contributed probably more to the sports of the world than any other place. For instance, when I say the UK, I'm also including Scotland, obviously. But if you think about it, what's probably the most popular sport in the world?
Soccer.
That's British, right? But in addition, the predecessor to hockey comes from Scotland. The predecessor, of course, to golf comes from Scotland. And then there's cricket, which is the predecessor to baseball. You guys know cricket? You've seen cricket played?
No, it's in Wonderland.
It's an interesting sport.
No, that's croquet, never mind.
Well, croquet. Weirdly enough, let's talk croquet for a second. Have you guys ever played croquet? Yep. Croquet was an intensely popular sport in the Middle Ages. It was played amongst a lot of different peoples because if you think about it, it's actually really easy to make the equipment. It's a bunch of clay balls essentially and little sticks. However, the way the game was played was a little bit different. And people liked it so much that they actually made an indoor version of croquet that you would play on a table. It was a green covered table that you would have these mallets that you would knock the balls in, and you would play croquet. Eventually, the rules of the game changed over and over again until eventually new targets were added, where you would have little tiny pockets put in the sides of the table. And instead of hitting the balls like that, you would actually hit down and hit it like this. Really cool. Really good sound. Cool. That's where it came from. It's just croquet with different rules. Anyway, the point is that these spread all throughout the world and change and develop depending on where you are. For instance, baseball, American baseball, is based on cricket. It's very similar in ways, but also very, very different. And again, this high standard of living means that for the most part, folks are pretty content. They do have socialized medicine, so they're similar to Canada, but there's a lot of different systems on how that actually works. And taxes can be much higher in some of these places. How much higher? Well, the most I've ever seen was 24%. Yeah, which in the United States you pay about 18 or 20%. So it's 4% more, basically, long story short. Now that being said, the benefits tend to be much larger. So, that's one of the reasons folks have said we should go to socialized medicine. The problem is there's no country quite as large as ours that does that. you know, so it would have to be a unique system, and there might be other unanticipated problems. If we look at Eastern Europe, economically, this is the poorest area in Europe. Largely that was because they've been transitioning from a planned economy. And that brings us to economics 101. We've already discussed market economics, haven't we? You guys know what I mean when I say a market economy?
Like,
Okay, let's talk about it. Well, yeah, actually, yeah, spot on. That's what we're talking about. In a market economy, the market determines how much of anything is produced and how much it costs. The market being what people are willing to pay for it. So, in other words, we determine the cost of pretty much everything in our economy. Here's how we do that. All right. Are you guys familiar at all with the NES Classic that's being sold nowadays? Okay, it's a Nintendo Entertainment System that is basically an emulator for Nintendo games back in the 80s. It looks similar to the Nintendo Entertainment System from the 80s, but it's smaller. They go retail right now in places like Walmart and Meijer for $60. But you can't find them. They're really, really hard to find because they're that popular. So instead, if you really, really, really want one, you can have one if you buy it on eBay for $500. Right? People are raising the price because there is a high demand and a low supply. Yes? Exactly. That's the market in action. A planned economy is where businesses are told what they're allowed to charge by the government. The government says, you get to make this much profit, end of line. You get to make this many of your product, end of line. They determine everything. The problem with that is, the benefit is that it actually, keeps businesses from price gouging people. But the problem is, it's not terribly great at predicting how much of anything to produce. There's not a lot of variables, or there's a lot of variables, I would say, in determining why you might need something. So, for instance, if we were running a planned economy, we're going to try to make it as efficient as possible. So we're going to look at the types of goods we're going to need to produce. So let's look at winter last year. Was it pretty snowy last winter? Reasonably so. I think it was a decently snowy winter. So if we were going off of that, in order to prepare for more snow this winter, we'd be producing, salt for, salting the roads, producing snow shovels, big heavy coats, everything you need to snow. And how is this winter been? Right. So we would have a ton of junk we can't sell, which basically is a loss of money. We might be able to sell it if we really, really lower the price, but that's going to be a loss for us. So if we respond and say, okay, for next year, we're not going to produce nearly as many snow shovels, and we have Snowmageddon, we're going to be in trouble there too, right?
Yes.
The fact of the matter is that planned economies are way more, or I should say, they're way less responsive than a market is, because let's be face it, humans are greedy. We are greedy things. There is no amount of want we find satisfactory. In other words, what I mean to say is, our wants for things are different. There are situations where it's not. So, for instance, if I said, who wants a free cheeseburger? You might want a free cheeseburger, and I can put it on your, and then if I gave you another free cheeseburger, you take it. Maybe, what if I give you another one? I mean, there's eventually a point where you're going to make yourself sick on cheeseburgers, right? Well, there's a soft limit on food things, but let's give you an example of something that has no limit. What about money? I said, well, $100 bill, and he said, who wants $100?
Me.
Is there any point where I could be shoveling money? He's like, no.
Yeah.
No. Probably not. Maybe like, how am I going to carry home all these $100 bills? I can't carry them all. I think you find a way. I think you find a way, right? So how do we, as a society, guarantee the fair distribution of resources? That is economics. That's what the study of economics is all about. And some people say, let the market do it. They don't figure it out. That's market economics, right? But the thing is, it also has disadvantages. For instance, In a true market economy, there would be nobody using, say, government positions to make certain they get a monopoly on something. There would be constant competition. But people try to cheat the system, and so inevitably things fall apart. So the point is, there is no perfect economic system. We just try to do the best we can with what we have. So basically, the Soviet Union was a planned economy. They've been moving to a market economy, and it's been kind of difficult. One of the biggest issues is energy. Now, in order for you to have a developed economy, you got to have the infrastructure. One of the big elements of infrastructure is power. Well, they don't necessarily have an abundance of that. They have to buy it from other places, which means their economy is really heavily dependent on other economies. This is one of the reasons why they're very nervous when it comes to the relationship with Russia. Culturally, this area is pretty mixed. You guys know the Holocaust, I presume. Have you guys ever heard of the Armenian Massacre? Okay, well, Armenia is a country. It's actually a people that existed in Eastern Europe that were dominated by a variety of other powers, but most recently the Ottoman Empire. And during the heyday, the end of World War I, Turkish soldiers began exterminating entire villages of Armenians, killing everybody, man, woman, and child. Now, that being said, the United States does not recognize that as a Holocaust. It is definitively a massacre, definitively a genocide, but the main difference is what was the intention. The Ottoman Turks and the Turks today claim that it was basically gross mismanagement during wartime, which could have been hypothetically, but at the same token, yeah.
What region is this?
Eastern Europe. Basically, it's a cultural crossroads. There's been peoples coming from this area, settled this area, for centuries, and there's been different cultures here. In a way, it is both European and Asian, in fact. Yeah, so for instance, let's take Hungary. Do you guys know where Hungary gets its name from?
Because they're hungry.
No, it's spelled differently.
Yeah, it's hungry.
Yeah, like Hungarian. Yeah, do you guys know where it comes from?
No.
Do you guys know who the Huns were?
Yes.
But, yeah, did you say something like Luana? No. Like, you know, like, no.
No, you're right. I was just waiting for you guys' system.
Okay.
How come are you think I'm just confused myself? Can I get on everything?
Oh my gosh, that's so
It says you can pretty much explain everything with this movie. And I will say this, Hungary, the Huns, that was a group of Turco-Mongolian peoples from Central Asia. So they're very similar to the Mongols. They were nomadic people who settled in Europe around the time of the Romans. You guys ever hear of Attila the Hun? Yeah. You guys know what his nickname was? Yeah. Nicknames play an important role in Turkish and Mongolian societies. In fact, Genghis Khan. You know who that is? Yeah. Okay, that's not how you say that name, by the way. It's Genghis Khan. It means oceanic ruler. He was the guy who ruled everything between the oceans. So, pretty important title. So let's get back to Attila. His nickname was the Scourge of God. A scourge is a whip, right? Used to beat criminals.
wow.
So that's a hardcore freaking name. Dude was so manly, right? He was like one of the manliest dudes that ever lived. He was so manly that when he died, instead of crying, all of his men started beating themselves so they would shed blood instead of tears. I mean, it's like a metal album, right? Holy cow. Yeah. That's savage. Why are you going to call these Only the blackest. I think you guys listen to Death a lot. Anyways. I forgot where I was going. Oh yeah. So they settled this area, and of course, they had their own little empire settled down, and you had other empires kind of hugging in on that area. and settling and creating new cultures. So again, there are these Central Asian peoples who come here to settle. By the way, the reason the Huns came here wasn't because they were looking for somewhere to conquer, it's because they got kicked out by other empires. You know, basically, Europe keeps getting almost conquered by groups that get beaten by other people. Like, that's how freaking warlike Central Asia was. Like, holy cannoli. Some other great titles, by the way. My favorite was the title of Mahmud of the Ghasanids. His title was Hammer of the Infidels. I mean, that's so unbelievably awesome. You know, it's like, I hope he has that on, like, you know, a t-shirt or something. Hammer of the Infidels. Hammer of the Infidels, yeah. And one thing that's kind of funny is the nicknames of Turkish rulers weren't necessarily always flattering. So you did have really like flattering ones, such as Suleiman Kanuni, which was the lawgiver. He basically created the wall, built the wall in the Ottoman Empire. And then you've got his father, who was named Selim the Stern, which doesn't sound that bad, right? He's a very stern figure. I'm sure you guys have had stern people in your life. Another translation is the Grim, as in the Grim Reaper.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Because one of the problems he had, as all rulers do, is whenever you die, all of your sons are going to fight for control of your kingdom, right? So literally every single time a sultan died, there was a civil war. So the way he solved that problem, he picked his best, most competent son and killed the rest.
Oh,
No.
Yeah, he just killed his own family.
that's terrible. What the heck?
It was his reasoning. Think about this. Why are my sons' lives more important than all of yours? If they fight, your sons will be the soldiers dying on the battlefields. That'll literally be hundreds of thousands of deaths. I can kill 5 and save hundreds of thousands of lives. Easy decision.
Could he just say this one right here's the king?
I mean, it could, and they did do that, but that didn't stop the other ones from fighting for a revolution. That literally happened every single time. That's one of the things we take for granted is a bloodless exchange of power. The first time this happened in British history was in the 1600s, and then once again in the 1840s. Every other time in history, when there's a change of power, someone dies. Usually lots of people die. That's why democracy is such a unique system. It is essentially symbolic violence. Yeah.
So the queen dies.
Yes.
Would there be? Okay.
Because they have no real power. True, they do have a line of succession. And hypothetically, could it happen? Yes, but why wouldn't? There's no power to be in the Queen of England. You basically sit around in your house and occasionally sign documents that are symbolic gestures. They're basically celebrities.
So what's the point of being? What's the point of having a monarchy?
Question. They've actually debated on voting them out a number of times, but they don't want to. And there's a number of reasons. Number one, tourism. Lots of tourists come from all over the world to come stare at the royal couples. Number two, the royal family technically owns a majority of London. As in, they own so much property value that if the British government got rid of the monarch. Okay, quick history lesson. Back in the days of George III, the crown was seriously in debt. So in exchange for forgiving all his debt and granting him essentially an allowance, he gave up a lot of the royal lands to the government to do with whatever they wanted. As long as he got the allowance, they got to keep it. So if they get rid of the monarchy, the government has to give back everything, which would basically come to the tune of something like £6 billion or something like that. So it's economically not even worth it. As far as what's the point of being a king, I guess it's a fun title. It's a lot of like respect without having to do much. So that's pretty cool. There's all kinds of videos on how to do this.
How do you what?
How to become king. Like for instance, it used to be in England that the firstborn male would become king. Now is the firstborn child. So, for instance, if let's say that the queen had twins, whoever comes out first, no, period. Whoever comes out, if there's a boy and a girl in there, whoever comes out first is the next ruler. So, now generally, the way that you decide who was queen, or king for that matter, is who had the bigger army. And there were definitely instances in British history where you had a loyal brother, like supporting a king. But a lot of times you also had folks up to no good and kind of nonsense. Here's a fun story. Do you guys know Robin Hood?
Yeah.
You guys ever see Robin Hood?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about who's the bad guy in Robin Hood.
The king. The drunken lion.
What is his name?
The drunk lion.
King of Richard was a good one. Who was this?
All right, let's talk
John.
Prince John.
Prince John.
Right, let's talk about the story here, okay? Here's the actual story of Robin Hood, right? So, there was a King Richard and a Prince John and another prince whose name I forget. He doesn't matter. He does matter, but he doesn't. And that's kind of the joke of the story. But I'll talk about that. I think his name was James, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so what happens is, they are the children of the King of England, Henry V, and his wife, Eleanor of the Aquitaine, who is the Queen of France, essentially, northern France. And so what happens is, the Queen wants Richard to be king once everything's said and done. Henry wants John to be king. Nobody cares about the other one. So what happens is, Henry and his wife fought several wars to determine the line of succession. I mean, like literally fighting wars with armies and catapults and crossbows. And Henry won. So he actually imprisoned his wife.
Wait, his wife or like his brother's wife?
No, his wife, Eleanor of the Aquitaine, was thrown in jail. And she was allowed to come out of his house arrest, but still. She was allowed to come out during Christmas and Easter festivities, because that's when the entire court would come back, so they had to put on a brave face. And so, there's this whole, situation at Christmas where he's there with his brother, or his family, and he's like, how was your accommodation, sweetheart? Oh, the prison was lovely, thank you for asking. He's like, you're just totally sniping each other the whole time. Meanwhile, you've got the brothers who are trying to kill each other, at Christmas dinner, poisoning, all this kind of stuff. And of course, they all fail, because, Henry is just a boss, right? So, right? I mean, the most awkward thing, by the way, there was a movie done with this with Meryl Streep as Eleanor of the Aquitaine, and Sir Patrick Stewart as Charles V. Totally worth it, Lions and Lincoln, would recommend. Anyways, back to it. So fast forward in the future, we have a king, and it becomes Richard. Eventually, Prince John does something that pissed off Henry. He's like, fine, Richard gets it. And so Richard is a man's man. He's fighting wars. It's secretly gay, allegedly, but whatever. He was doing manly things, and so he's going to go fight the Crusades. Well, fighting wars is expensive. So he's all fighting crusades, spending his fortune, really wasting a fortune down the crusades because he's being a man. And somebody has to raise taxes to pay for it. You know who that is? Prince John. John has to raise taxes to pay for Richard's shenanigans. It's like, if you watch the movie Robin Hood, is Prince John's like, I'm raising taxes because I'm evil and I like the whole money. No, he was paying for Richard's stupidness. And then he also does some really dumb things. For instance, he ends up running off with one of his vassals' wives. Yeah, vassals are people who swear loyalty to you in exchange for land in kingdoms. By the way, his wife was 14, he was 36. Yeah, that's pretty common. Anyways, so that's going down. So needless to say, he was not going to have that. So that vassal rose an army with a bunch of other pissed off vassals who then threatened Prince John at point of the sword to sign a document called Magna Carta, which was the first set of the law in England.
But how could he say he was the king?
Well, he wasn't, but he was acting as regent. So the other question is, was it a legal document when it was sign this or die? The answer is, according to Pope, no. So technically, all English law is invalid. Now that being said, since then there have been other special dispensations and things like that. Politics gets really weird in the Middle Ages, and shenanigans are had by all. Meanwhile, the peasants, of course, hate John. They love Richard because he's going out and fighting those dirty Muslims, crusades. And then you've got John, who's raising all the taxes. We hate John, we love Richard. But it's Richard's fault. So John gets kind of lambasted for doing all these things. And so, of course, what is the fiction that all the peasants want to believe in? That there's going to be a good nobleman who's going to stick it to the man and steal from the rich and give to the poor. And that's where you have the birth of the legend of Robin Hood. So that's where that whole thing comes in. Now, technically speaking, the real bad guy most often portrayed in the Robin Hood stories is not Prince John. It's the Sheriff of Nottingham and his cousin, the Guy de Louison. I think is how you pronounce that name. But anyways, long story short, the legends are pretty freaking brutal too. Like there was one legend of Robin Hood I was reading where basically like Robin Hood shows up and like beheads everybody. It's like, whoa, dude, It's totally not what you'd expect to happen. But again, this was a legend, so you can kind of write whatever you want. Anyways, but I did want to finish up a couple of the things here. As far as art forms, one of the things we don't tend to think about is non-traditional art. If you think about it, most of the art we see in museums and galleries is like paintings and statues and all that kind of stuff. But everything is art in one way or another. Everything was designed. So one of the things that's most well known for this area is what we call folk art. So an example of that, you guys know what a quilt is?
Yes.
Why do we make quilts? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, why do we make them like that? Wouldn't it just make more sense to just cut a square of fabric?
So they're pretty, or you can use
Maximum cluster. Pretty.
There you go. Think about this. If you're going to be making clothing, right? I don't know if you guys have ever made like a Halloween costume or made clothing, but one of the things you're doing is you're taking the pattern, you're taking the shape, and you're cutting it out of fabric. You're going to have leftover fragments. You can't really do anything with them. So you set them aside. You just want to throw them away, you set them aside. Right? You build them up, you build them up, you build them up. So you have a bunch of scraps, and you're like, hopefully you arrange them in these neat patterns, and then sew them all together. Well, it's just an efficient use of materials you have left over. That's where they came from. That is an art form, to be sure, and nowadays a lot of folks buy fabric for the purpose of making quilts. They don't really make clothes first, but still, that's where it comes from. And there's all kinds of other sort of household items that we would consider art just because of their choice in design. Furniture is a huge thing. Anyways, I think that's pretty much everything. So we're going to call that a day. We got about 8 minutes to go. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this guy to YouTube, and yeah, you guys just kind of hang out. My plans for this week, by the way, are updated on Edmodo. I would like for you to do another BBC News article this week. So that would make a total of 3. 1 from Latin America, 1 from last week on Europe, and then 1 from this week on Europe. Okay?
So what was this?
A BBC News article in Europe. As opposed to Super Europe?
Okay, what about the
No, nothing's that specific, more general.
And what was the speech?
Europe again.
So it's the same thing?
Yeah. All right, let me do that.